Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's Tuesday night. We got the boys in the band, and we got a cool little topic for you here tonight. First, let's introduce everybody. We've got two of our Canadian friends here tonight. We got Armando Venditti and Mr. Rick Bonte.
Hello.
We've got two of our Chicago friends here today, Louis Nasser and George Lamie. And Stephen, I feel like we're missing someone from your neck of the woods, but you're from all the way from Scotland, Mr. Stephen Reid.
He's worth more than one.
That is true.
Well, purely in physical size.
I'll take it.
Good to see you guys. That was a good save there, Louis.
Well, Stephen, since it's you and I are the only representatives from Scotland and New York, we'll band up tonight, all right?
That sounds good.
There you go. There you go.
I mean, you've got a Perth accent anyway, Peter, so it's perfect.
I absolutely have a Perth accent. After this show, I'm going to go listen to a little Fish and have a little wee bit of bitters and that's all. Forget that. Everybody erase that. Sorry, terrible. Anyway, tonight's topic. I haven't stopped laughing since last night, everybody. So for those of you who watched the Hudson Valley Squares last night, I have been on a relative high since then. And I'm sure this will be no exception here today and in the Prog seat. So today's topic, we haven't done one of these in quite a while. And a lot of times albums come up in discussions where maybe the band themselves don't really qualify as a progressive rock band, but they may have an album or two that kind of is prog. And we're always, you talk online, on Facebook, here on YouTube, wherever. It's like, well, that album is kind of prog. And other people are like, well, maybe not really. They're not a prog band, but that has some proggy tendencies. So what we decided to do is talk about two albums tonight by two very notable bands. And each one of these albums, I have been in discussions with other people, have seen discussions where people are talking about these albums, saying that these might be the prog albums in their catalogs. And the first one we're going to talk about is Tommy by the Who, otherwise known as one of the great rock operas of all time. But maybe there's lots of prog on this album, perhaps, right? The second one we're going to talk about is Queen 2. Pretty heavy album, but a pretty artful album too. Is it heavy rock? Is it glam? Is it prog? That's what we're going to talk about. So we're going to start off with Tommy by the Who. Of course, like I said, their great album from 1969. George is going to kick us off. George, what do you think about Tommy? In the grand scheme of things, as far as its artfulness, its prog qualities and whatnot.
I gotta say, I don't see it. I think if you took the conceptual lyrics out, people wouldn't even suggest it. I mean, it's varied. There's not a lot of unusual instrumentation for them. There's a little bit, it's not like frilly or adorned like you might think that it would if you're trying to make the point that it's progressive. Musically, I think it's a hard rock album with the overriding theme lyrics. And I understand why people go there with it, to the prog thoughts, but you pull the songs apart and none of the songs on their own strike me in any way like that. I guess someone might point to Underture, but I just don't see it. Maybe it's just me.
Could be. Rick, what are your feelings on this?
Well, my feelings is that just the attempt of doing the rock opera is very progressive, especially when you start off come out of the gate of being a pop band. Starting off the way they did. And there's no credit, there's no question in my mind that they're influenced with what's going on in the world. Psychedelia, the drugs. No doubt if it wasn't for Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper, where people now using an album as a concept where you can throw ideas, where you can do epic and throw some hits in there, it starts to make you think about being an experience. And for the Who, I consider this a progressive rock album because it helped the future band that coming around the corner to say, wow, let's do this like full time. Let's make this right out of the gate. And we know bands like, Kim Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, they came off being Prog right off the start because of the powerhouses like these albums that made them say, this is art and this is the way we want to show off. The difference with progressive rock is that they might include some classical music and other fusions of other things that normally wouldn't gel with standard rock and roll, but they make it work. Pete Townshend did do that because just the fact that you're doing a musical and it's still cool, hard rocking. And I do think the undershirt and the overshirt itself shows the time signature stuff and sparks show that there's some progressive, instrument going on here. And just the fact that where they came from, to me, that's a sign of progressive rock. Well, they don't stay in this house all the time. I mean, sure, they do Quadrophenia. It's more sophisticated, a little more different, but I think it's still progressive in a way where you can respect that there was a lot of thought process in here, that it took a body of work to make all of these songs work. Because you're right, some of those songs won't stand on its own. Do Pinball Wizard, and of course a lot of them do, Acid Queen. But just the fact that they can carry this drama for a band that's never known to do that before, other than a little taste of it in a quick one, to me it's very progressive. And I give it definitely a progressive rock album title. Though they don't hang around this arena forever, but they definitely touched that. And every album since then, even now, Who's Next, they're always going to have some kind of epic because they, when you do something that big, there is an expectation by the listeners to say, hey, give us some mod music, but there's some people out there who say, hey, show us some more of your epic genius stuff. And if he didn't have that reputation, he would never go there. So that had to be pretty progressive to get that reputation.
So Lewis, without this album, do you think we get something like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway?
No. And so here's the thing. This record to me, the first and most difficult thing and why I wanted to be on the show is because it finally happened, the moment I always dreaded, where we would somehow have to address the answer to the question, what is prog?
Yeah, we haven't done that at all in a year plus on this show.
Because if we don't get into that giant bucket of shit, then if we don't define what it is, then we don't, is it prog? Is it not prog? Right? So, people call it a rock opera. In reality, for me, what is very different about this record and why I like it a lot is because it shows you that you can make a really, and I'm agreeing with George, it's a hard rock album. And what makes it very unique is that it's mostly acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
It's not even electric guitars. It's mostly acoustic guitars and 12-string acoustic guitars. And then it has brass played by Entwistle. And it has the singing is really where Daltrey, I think, finds his voice within the Who. And but as is the case with Pete Townshend, I know people are going to hate on me for this, but I'm wearing asbestos underwear, so fire away. I find that his stories are borderline idiotic, but his songs are so brilliant, and the lyrics individually, right, are so good that you can find, because they come from a very raw place of emotion. So I think anybody can find a line or two that is totally relevant to them. And therefore it takes on a different weight and a different character for you than it might for without that rawness to it. That's the thing. That's the genius of Pete Townshend, in my view. His musical stuff is one thing, and his use of just like our friend Simon is a master of negative space in joke telling and speech. I think Pete Townshend is a master of negative space in rhythm guitar playing. It really is almost like a jazz joke, but the stuff he doesn't play is just as important as the stuff he does play.
I agree.
In my view.
I agree.
So that record suddenly made it okay to be pretentious, and okay in the sense of dollars and cents, pounds, shillings, and pence, right?
Yeah.
Because that record is the record that put them out of debt, It's the record that made them superstars. And it really just kicked, in my view, it kicked the floodgates open for people to then just freely explore whatever blend. Oh, the Who's doing opera. Well, I'm going to bring in symphonic shit. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Right. And in that way, I would say for sure, the answer to your question is, yeah, without this record, there would have never been many albums like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Many groups who were influenced by the Who, would not have been doing the things they were doing. So
Right on.
yeah.
Rush with the
Rush.
Yep. Yep.
But is it prog music, right? I don't want to go into that bucket. I'll just say that I think it was very influential, and it helped give people who did actual prog, non-controversially defined as prog, the confidence to be as pretentious as they wanted to be. Yep. And that's very important for an artist, to just have that somebody who you look up to gives you the okay. That's huge, right? So yeah.
Yep. So Armando, I'm pretty sure Pete Townshend came up with the term rock opera. Does that do this music justice? I mean, there's really no opera in this, right? Or would this be better termed rock theater? I mean, if you were to give, because again, this is new stuff in 1969. Mm-hmm. What would you call this music if you had to put a tag on it? So we're trying to qualify as a prog or not, but what do we call this?
I would definitely call it rock theater. The thing with Tommy is, just a bit of background. Townshend was not satisfied with how the singles were performing before Tommy. So his manager said to him, maybe you should stop thinking about singles and start thinking more on a broader scale, to write, a narrative, like a story, and put music to it, kind of a thing. So is it a rock opera? Is it theater? Definitely. When you approached me with the topic, I thought, okay, I could do this. This is going to be quite interesting. So I listened to the album again, and I have various forms of it, CD, it's a good album. I like the album. Is it prog? No. In the true classic sense, it is not prog. In what we came to know as prog in the 70s. But no. The storyline, when I listen to it, just for a sec, it becomes a little diluted by the second record, by side 3. It meanders a little bit. The music is amazing, but to keep it as a thread for an entire 4 sides, it goes off track at some point for me. So again, to me, it's not prog.
Pretty tight music, though, I would say. Yeah, we often talk about these prog epics and things, and lots of keyboard solos and guitar solos and these long extended passages. Other than in spots, I mean, you don't get a lot of that here. It's a lot of vocals and a lot of moving from one thing to the next.
It is tight in that respect. There's no grandiose keyboard passages or guitar solos or even different time signatures that are used that I could tell with my naive ears. As little vignettes, like little stories, maybe it works. But as a full blown rock opera, it doesn't flow for me. It used to, but I used to love it, listen to it. But now it just, I don't know, it doesn't flow well.
I've talked to a lot of people actually who feel that Tommy hasn't aged as well as they would have hoped. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree, but I have heard that from many people.
I see that a lot.
I think there's an important thing to remember also. For as much as Townshend likes to tell you the story of his albums, I don't know of any artist that I admire as much as I admire him, who I also really dislike for his tendency to be such a revisionist of his own history. I mean, there is this thing where he was basically trying to make sure that the record would get a good review. So he invited this Rolling Stone reviewer or some British journalist, I forget the name, to hear what they had done so far. And the guy was listening to it, and you know, it's a story, and there's child abuse, and there's this, and there's murder, and then there's drugs, and there's this weird, and it's not really yet finished, but the guy was, yeah, it's all right. And at that time, Townshend noticed that this guy had a similar interest with him. He liked to play pinball. And Townshend said, okay, well, it's a story about a blind, deaf, and you know, abused boy who's had this shitty life. But what if in addition to all that, he was also a pinball champion? And the guy says, it's a masterpiece. That's how Pinball Wizard came to be. And that's how the whole pinball angle joined the story. And that is the thing that I was trying to say before. I think that the story itself is weak.
Mm-hmm.
And the songs that exist only for the purpose of moving the story along are also weak. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Short
The songs that they play live, even when they're not playing the whole thing, are timeless. They're classics. They're the songs we love, and we love them for a reason. I don't know exactly what's the amazing journey, but I don't need to know.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it, and I am on a fucking amazing journey.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole point. It's the same thing. Townshend, I don't think, has ever understood that. And I say that as somebody who, for me, The Who is my favorite band. I don't think he's ever understood that he needs to get out of his own way and let the music do the talking for him. He talks too much.
Well, it definitely made it a musical by having people taking a part, you know, I mean.
Sure,
Uncle
but
Ernie, and you had, you know, the Acid Queen, and so there was some role playing that you have to do it visually live, or when he gets into the big budget of things, Elton John comes in, or Billy Idol comes in, or whatever those concerts, it was enough to be respected to follow these characters, or, you know, they were real. So, yeah, I don't know. Opera is maybe a strong title, but it's definitely a rock musical. And I think that's, yeah. And I honestly don't think anything, like when you think about the idea of Tommy, when they put out under set list, they put Tommy and all the songs underneath it. That's like us saying 2112, The Temple, and all those different titles underneath that big title. So if it wasn't for Tommy, would we have 2112 like that? Would Yes do the storyline? Would Tarkus, would ALP say, let's dedicate a whole side to an album and we'll make all these chapters to this story? I'm not saying nobody would, but Pete Townshend beat them to that.
Absolutely.
And then also made it famous to get.
But here's the thing.
Made it cool to do that.
We've all heard the 1969 version of the album. It's magic. Right?
Right.
Not lightning in a bottle. Although not all the songs are magical, but the whole thing sort of fucking works. Now, we've also heard what happens when Pete Townshend is given money and the opportunity to revise his work. Do we feel the same way about the soundtrack for the movie?
No.
Do we feel the same way about the soundtrack to the fucking Broadway musical that they did?
No.
No.
That is where I start to wonder, you know, maybe somebody did serve me one of those steel bun shit burgers, because it's not really.
That's a good point.
He keeps trying to reinvent the wheel,
mean,
and I find that you have to be very silly to move away from your best work. Your best work has to just carry you, not the other way around.
Yeah.
That is the only flaw that I would dare level to a guy of his talent is, dude, just, you don't have to have a narrator. You don't have to tell me all this shit. Your songs say everything.
Right on.
They really do.
You bring up a good point. That's my segue into Stephen here. So his best work. So, you know, Tommy, for most people, is a huge leap forward from what we got before. Whereas you have this rhythm and blues band basically doing singles. Yeah, they had a couple albums, but you know, are any of them drop dead classics? Yeah, arguably, right? And a lot of good material on there, but they were more of like a song-based band. So how does Pete Townshend go from those albums and maybe kind of like a dip the toe in the water with a quick one to Tommy, like just overnight. I mean, because all this happened, boom, 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 and then Tommy's out. He's a genius, and overnight. I mean, that's kind of a pretty cool transition there, right?
It's really quite an amazing transition, in actual fact, when you go to things like Magic Bus, which is really rocked up pop music. I like it. I don't have a problem with it in any shape or form. And then you come away with something like Tommy. The evolution is ginormous, especially when you look at the era that we're talking about here, because there's not. I mean, prog kind of exists at this stage, or progressive music kind of exists at this stage. Semantics are important here. So what I did is I referred to my handy and short guide to what is prog. Okay, so here we go.
Oh my God.
And what I actually did is I went back and you know, I've listened to this more times this week than I have done in a long time. Okay. And from flicking through the pages of this short tome that I have here, I actually come up with 10 questions. Okay, so I want you, Peter, I want you to be, not Tommy, I'm not going to wish that on you. I want you to be the album. Okay, and I'm going to ask you these questions, and you can only answer them with a yes or a no. Okay, so are you a concept album?
Yes.
Are you a double album?
Yes.
Do you have multiple characters within your story?
Yes.
Are you an overblown idea that's grand in execution?
Yes.
Do you contain some, not necessarily loads, but some long instrumental passages?
Yes.
Do you have musical motifs that reappear as you play out?
Yes.
Has the album been adapted into a play, musical, or film?
Yes.
Do you have at least one 9-minute plus song?
Yes.
Are your longer songs linked by some short joining tracks merely there to move the story along?
Yes.
Do you have lots of lyrical and musical complexity and have great interplay between the musicians?
Yes.
That's a full house on the prog bingo card, okay? that is, if you wanted to take a stereotypical idea of what a progressive rock album should be, well, there's your basis, okay?
Yes.
However, right, okay, looking at it a little bit more seriously, I mean, there's even bonus points there. You're a double concept album, all right? Realistically, for me, this is a progressive album, but it's not what we call prog, okay? And I think that where we started with what George said really tells you an awful lot about this, because I think that the language is rock music. I think the ideology is prog, okay? The Who, at this stage, start to become quite a macho rock band. It's really quite muscular music. There's lots of different themes, and it does calm, and there are much more complex passages in there too. But realistically, when you hear Keith Moon clattering round those toms, it can only be Keith Moon destroying the drums. That's the only thing that it can be. Nobody roams on the bass like John Entwistle does. Do you know, Roger Daltrey, as he has a tendency to, and I love his vocals, he is stretching for everything that he can't quite reach. He's always up there somewhere singing to a point where you think, is that great or awful? I'm not quite sure, but man, oh man, he does it well, you know? And something that Lewis said, there's lots and lots of acoustic guitar on this, and that diggity, 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 nobody does that like Townshend. But if you can imagine somebody else taking that basis and adapting the arrangements, not the songs, don't go and rewrite them. I don't think it's that much of a leap to say that you could make this into a progressive rock album. I think that basis is there, but the Who's language in 1969 was bare chests and macho kind of, you know, stomping rock music. And that to me is the difference. What follows, what we hold up as the classic prog era, which we're about to kick into, didn't want to be macho music. It's not what that's about. It's not about rock anthems. It's much more kind of ethereal and fantastical than that. Do you know, it's different language. However, I do genuinely believe that this album has a thought process that works in the same way. And I think it's very strong throughout it. There's very little on Tommy other than a big hit that you think, that's just straight ahead rock music. It's not four on the floor. It's not just verse, chorus, and there's lots of choruses on this album, don't get me wrong. But to me, its heart is progressive, but it tells you its story through rock music. So is it prog? I don't think it's prog. Is it progressive? I definitely think it's progressive.
So it will be progressive rock because it doesn't forget to
Yeah,
rock.
To me, this is a progressive rock album.
That's what I said.
And the semantics for me, do you know, actually, this was interesting, and I kind of half did it on purpose. Somebody today on Twitter just put up, I'm listening to this album today. Yeah, that's fine, that's nice. So what are you listening to was the question. So I put up a picture of these and put underneath it, doing homework for In the Prog Seat. What was the first reply I got? The first reply I got was,
It's not prog.
are they progressive rock?
Yeah.
Okay.
Really?
And as I put on next to, well, that is what we hope to find out. That is the point of this. And I think that that's possibly because we've now drawn quite a strong distinction between what is progressive and what is prog. I have a little problem with that because I have lots of music in my collection that I think is progressive.
Me too.
Even if it's just progressive for that band.
Okay,
Yes.
I got you.
Well, no, and thankfully not, because I like my prog, but I don't want everyone that's got progressive ideals to sound like prog. And I would even argue that a lot of the things that we cover on here as progressive, and rightly so, are not prog. So it depends on what you want to put in your box and which box you even want to open and put it into. But yes, to agree with Lewis, is that progressive rock? It's progressive rock.
Yeah.
But it's not prog rock.
Right.
Massive
Yeah, that's a
difference.
good
Gotcha.
point.
Yeah,
And
That's
it's,
what I was saying earlier, because even when you mentioned the macho part, what do you think we get when we get into progressive metal? They're bringing that who energy, that macho thing. Dream Theater is not, they're not that tame. They're not like Camel. That's the difference. We label that prog. Why? Because it's light music? Or
Well,
light,
but I would argue that
they can be bombastic like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So I don't know. I have a hard time with that because prog is just the fact that you've always been progressive. Where this is a progressive rock album. That's what I say. I
Not
think
a band
progressive
per
rock
se.
Band.
Yeah.
This is a progressive rock album. Doesn't make you a prog band because you don't carry that banner. Not like a band like Argent. They started off rock, and then about 3 albums later they got prog, and they carried it to the end. That became the definition. Just Jethro Tull started off as blues, country, folk, and rock, but then when they found their bearing on being thick as a brick, they carried that banner from there on, known as a prog rock band. Some of them get that appetite and they stay there. With the Who, they didn't. This is a progressive rock album, but they're not a prog rock band because they don't stay in that territory. They experiment. That's my opinion.
I would say Tull is an interesting example because this to me is rock that's progressive. Okay. A lot of what Tull did isn't. It's a different thing entirely, but because we class them as a prog band, we go back and listen to those albums and go, well, that's prog.
Mm-hmm.
But the vast difference between that catalogue, if that's all prog, then prog is ginormous. And it is. And that is why it's so difficult to decide which box to put an awful lot of things in.
That's right. Right on.
I would say two things to what some of the points that were made. One is there is a very big difference between prog metal bands and the Who in the macho sense. A prog metal band like Dream Theater will never match the ferocity of the Who when they were kicking ass and taking names. That's not what they do. That's
I
just
know
not what they do. And I don't think any of the guys in Dream Theater would dispute that. They just don't have that level of insanity, right? They don't operate like that. You have to be very concentrated to play those fucking Dream Theater songs. You can't just let it rip and discover that you're bleeding all over your guitar. This is not how that works, right? The second thing I would say is just a point of order for Stephen, that we didn't actually answer the question. How did they go from being a singles band to Tommy suddenly? And I would just argue that I don't think it was that sudden. I think that the album The Who Sells Out is a bridge.
Yeah.
It's a first sort of experiment in stringing together a sort of a concept album where they're sort of mocking commercials and they're doing things, but there's also suddenly this character Rael, right, enters into the story, and Armenia City in the Sky. These are not fucking products, right? Now Pete Townshend is showing you some of the things that are cooking in his head, right? He is already sort of moving in that direction. So it's not really as sudden as all that. My understanding to what Armando said was Pete Townshend felt he couldn't write a better single than I Can See for Miles. That was his big thing. And that did not perform as well as he thought it should. So that and the crippling debt that the Who had amassed due to the fact that they felt obligated to rip apart their instruments to get people happy, right? Meant it was make or break. Tommy in the career of the Who is very much like Scenes of a Memory in the career of Dream Theater.
Great.
It was a make or break moment, and both bands got lucky, and we're all better for it. But the reality is that I don't think it was sudden. I would dispute that. I think Pete Townshend always had these anxieties and these interests, and it was difficult for him to be able to bring that sort of material to the band, because obviously Roger Daltrey, who nowadays is a guy who understands the songbook a lot better than the writer, and who respects it more than the writer, and who values it more.
I agree.
At that time, he was just basically, as the British like to say, he was just a yob, right? He's just a street fighting tough who didn't really care about anything other than, whatever was in front of the 6 inches of his nose. So it was difficult for Pete Townshend and for Roger Daltrey to sing songs like I'm a Boy. How can you be a macho band and sing about things like this? Right? Now, Pete Townshend has always had this duality, right? We're talking 1982. The same guy that brought us Pictures of Lily is writing How Can You Do It Alone? Apparently, Pete Townshend has not quite grasped masturbation. It's still there, somehow intriguing,
Oh, God.
And I find that it's interesting. He's a very interesting guy. I owe him a lot, and I respect him a lot, even though I'm talking shit about him. I do so from a place of love. But seriously, if you just analyze what he did, I think he's always had that. He's like a guy split in two. He wants to rock. He has that anger. He has that emotion. But at the same time, he has very intellectual pursuits. And in his mind, they don't really mesh that well. So the Who's music is always schizophrenic for that reason. The main writer can't really, he's split, And
to go one step further on that, because that's a really good point, and that's kind of how I wanted to close this segment, is one of the things that I always noticed about Tommy is that the album itself, the studio album, has a lot of little nuances. It's actually kind of subtle. You mentioned Lewis, and I think George as well, how it's mostly acoustic guitar. And it's, even though it's a hard rock album, it's really not all that rocking, right? However, when you take this and you play it on the stage, the Tommy performance at Leeds, at Woodstock, at the Isle
Yes.
of Wight is ferocious.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it becomes that hard rock album that I think it was always meant to be. And for me, the prog nuances that we're kind of talking about, the progressive tendencies that you get on the studio album, disappear when it's played live, and it becomes the true rock opera, whatever we want to call it.
I agree.
And I think it was always meant to be.
I agree.
The thing is, just quickly, the thing is when they would do Tommy live, they had the opportunity to even stretch out more.
Yeah.
With the pieces, with the music, right? And go off in certain directions that are sort of confined on the album version. So yeah, I mean, and in terms of like what Lewis just said about the Who sells out, that is a precursor as to what's going to happen with Tommy, right? Like,
It's like that was the warm-up gig, kind of, right?
Yeah, kind of thing. Yeah. I didn't mean to say that. Okay, they did the singles. They weren't satisfied with, Pete Townsend wasn't satisfied with what happened. So bam, Tommy comes out, and there you go. Like, they found their stride. No. The Who Sells Out was a sort of warm up. Like Benefit was a warm up to Aqualung, right? So yeah, everything comes in phases and steps, right?
Yeah. And Lewis, it's an interesting kind of comparison between Tommy and Scenes from a Memory by Dream Theater, because I think both albums, after all that went into making them and playing them live for a year or two afterwards, I think it completely wiped both bands out for a while, right? Like Townsend had to be like, I got to put Tommy aside. Dream Theater had to put Scenes from Memory aside, revisit it later on, which both bands did, but both albums just took on a life of their own.
Very similar. 2112 was a crossroad for them too, in that there was a do or die situation.
Yeah, 2112 was a make or break.
Yeah.
So interesting, but you know what? What an expectation though, because right after Tommy, now you're expecting everything you do is greatness. So that Lighthouse project would end up being Who's Next, but he got burnt out. That happened to a lot of great writers, where it's the expectation starts getting the best of you. Even though he did come close with Quadrophenia, as far as bringing another powerful concept record, it was just a rock record. It's not, it wasn't dual. I don't know. It's kind of different, but I did think it's interesting the amount of pressure that must be to live up to that work.
Oh yeah, well, Lighthouse, what he wanted to make even greater than Tommy. That was his concept.
Right? And the songs are great. I mean, even better. Like Who's Next is amazing material.
Yeah.
But here's another question, and it could be for another show, and then we'll get on to the other topic.
This is the original box for the Lifehouse.
Oh,
that
wow.
they sold initially. I ordered directly from Pete Townsend, and we exchanged a couple of letters. This is the original thing that they did like 20 years ago.
Really?
Before he began this was a revision on the revision, and then he'd start to review it again and again and again, right? This is he always does. But yeah.
I think that the one of the many interesting things about this is that the man himself would probably be appalled that we're discussing whether it's prog rock or not.
Yes.
I think he'd be
Probably.
appalled by that notion. And when I was kind of taking notes and writing down what I thought about it earlier on, what I actually closed it with was Tommy is definitely not intended to be progressive or prog. To me, there's no doubt that it's not intended as a prog rock album. George is bang on the money with that. This is not intended to be prog rock in any shape or form. But ironically, it's more progressive than so much prog music has become. And that's why I think that it's maybe all these years down the line, we're now going back at it and appraising it in a way that it wasn't when it was released.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Is Tommy more progressive than a Pineapple Thief album or a Jadis album or a Porcupine Tree album? I mean,
Well, what do you also mention, Pete? You also say there's another term, art rock, where they're trying to be more artistic statement, and that's a splash that a lot of people would say that's kind of in the arena of progressive rock.
Rock
but it
is
might
like
be
art
that
rock's like a
musical
slippery
statement,
slope, right?
I
'Cause
mean,
it's
that's
like,
yeah, you know what I mean.
yeah.
So that comes up a lot where people get, well, is that kind of the same thing?
It's not
you
quite
know?
prog, but we'll call it art rock because it is kind of artsy, right? And that's like
Yeah.
it's like the safe thing to do. Yeah. I mean,
Yes, yes.
There's a
People
million
think
bands
Pink
that fall.
Floyd.
Pete
What's that?
Townsend himself
Pink
is
Floyd, yeah.
quoted as saying
Yeah,
that
definitely Pink Floyd.
he's only ever missed two in the early days of the Who. He actually missed two shows. Like he just didn't bother showing up for the shows. One was to see one of the first concerts by King Crimson, and the other was to go see a show by Pink Floyd and the Soft Machine. So whatever he says now, and we all know that his opinion about himself changes before he finishes expressing the sentence. I think that he obviously likes that sort of thing. He found something very appealing about what King Crimson had created. He saw he could see the potential of what was going to become Pink Floyd. He understood something there that maybe even the guys in Floyd at that time didn't see.
Yeah.
In the same way, you
I
know,
agree.
that's why he's really a dude who's unique. He's very smart. He's probably too smart for his own good.
This
And
this was my question from before, though. Because he wrote a majority, or basically 99 or 98% of the catalog on the albums. Is it fair for someone to put all of that responsibility on themselves in terms of creating music?
I would say that Ian Anderson wrote more of Jethro Tull than Pete Townsend wrote for the Who, because John Entwistle wrote a big chunk.
Yeah. But it's the bulk by far. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
No, I'm
it's
saying,
a-
yeah, the bulk of the material he wrote.
I mean, it's been well documented. If you read various Pete Townsend books in his autobiography, he put tremendous pressure on himself
oh yeah.
to write
Yes.
the majority of these albums
Very true.
year after
I'm
year
not-
after year.
And my question is, to the panel and to anyone out there watching, hello, is it fair for a songwriter to do that to themselves, like to put all of that pressure on themselves? Because eventually you're going to snap, like whoever you are. The well is going to run dry. You're not going to come up with the goods.
Yeah, I don't know how fair it is. I mean, the expectations were there, right? You got the record company pressure and
Yeah.
the pressure from the fans. I don't know.
Some of it's self-inflicted, like Brian Wilson, when he put up with the Pet Down, then he had to live up to this, supposed to be what could be the masterpiece of masterpiece, Smiled, and he burnt out. He couldn't do it. It was just too hard, and it just he actually one flew over the cuckoo's nest on that one. But it came back. It got revisited, but it took a lot. Even the Lighthouse Project got too much, where Pete had to surrender and move on.
But again,
but that was self-inflicted.
Yeah, but I would say that the reason Lifehouse failed is not because the music was bad. The music is absolutely magical. The reason that Lifehouse failed is, once again, because Pete Townsend couldn't get out of his own way.
No
He
one
wouldn't let the
understood
songs speak for
story.
themselves. He had all this bullshit that the audience had to live with them. The Young Vic Theater, the guys in the band didn't understand it. He's talking about the grid, and people are wearing these suits, and they're feeding music into them through these tubes, right? Like Muzak.
Too much.
It's a very interesting idea, but he doesn't articulate these ideas well. That's the thing he doesn't understand. His ideas are best articulated through songs in that medium. The story, the web work, no bueno. And that is the problem.
Okay.
The problem is that this is
That was very
the band
scientific.
at that point, they just said, look, man, it worked with Tommy and we didn't know what the fuck that was about. So whatever, right? So we will do this one too. You lead the way with your crazy bullshit. We will play. And if you hear the demos of any of these Pete Townsend songs, Pete Townsend solo is not The Who. The Who is Pete Townsend songs arranged and performed by these guys, right? So the record speaks for itself. He got frustrated that some idea that he himself couldn't articulate, people didn't understand.
Agreed.
He articulated it. I think maybe for some people, like the minority of it, of people, that maybe it was too much information to take in
Maybe, but
on the double album.
you know, even when he's trying to explain it to the people he's doing it with, you know,
He's
Oh, yeah.
confused.
if you
doing
read
that.
if you read the stories of, if you read Roger Daltrey's autobiography on that, it's actually hilarious and heartbreaking at the same time, because he feels bad now as a 70-year-old man that he couldn't be more supportive, and the band itself, nobody understood it. Everybody was pushing it, you know. Terrence Stamp wanted to make a Tommy movie when Pete Townshend was trying to make Lifehouse. There were all kinds of pressures. It was very difficult for this. And let's not forget, Pete Townshend was a baby. He was in his early 20s.
Yeah.
Okay. So he didn't have the maturity. He didn't have the experience. That was what made it cruel. That this world of grown-ups suddenly arrived around him like vultures because they saw the money and they saw the blood on the water, right? And it was like, all right, you need to do what you need to do, and here we'll give you whatever you need to stay awake so you can keep on churning the songs. That's what's fucked up. I think that he had a nervous breakdown because he's a very emotional guy, and he could not convey. He couldn't have his band with him. He didn't have a support system. You know, that's very important when you're a writer. You have to have people who believe in you. Like, your band is your gang. And if they're not your gang, then you're alone. And that's very hard.
Very true. It's very
You
true.
know?
And I kind of think in this band, he was kind of alone.
Yes.
Maybe he did that to himself.
Yes. And now, as an almost 80-year-old, him and Daltrey are like a nice married couple.
After all
You
these
know?
years, right?
And I
Yeah.
think that's beautiful. That now they have a thing going where they respect each other and they understand
They're
what they
closer
did.
than ever. Yeah.
Yeah.
On that documentary that I have, I posted on Facebook, Roger Daltrey did say that he felt he could have been more supportive. He couldn't understand where Townsend was coming from in some of his writings, even with Tommy. But at the same time, Townsend wasn't really explaining it fully to them.
Yeah.
Like, this is the music. This is what we're gonna do.
Here it
This
is,
the
interpreted,
storyline.
right? Because that's what he had to do. He had to interpret it.
Exactly. This is a storyline. This is the music. Play it. Well, what's it about? Never mind. Play it.
Yeah.
I'll explain later.
He knows it in his head.
Yeah,
Roger
he
doesn't know it in
knows.
his head, right?
He knows it in his head, but in order to, my hands look like claws right now. In order to articulate it fully to the band, he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, we'll just go ahead. You know, we're getting paid. Shut up right now. Like, we'll do whatever Pete says, right? And we're getting paid. You know, but it's a sad thing.
Yeah. Welcome, Jon Neudorf. What's going on?
Hello, everyone.
We
How
got
you
three
doing?
people from
Hello.
Canada here today. Cool. So, John,
Yeah.
we were just kind of wrapping up our conversation about the Who and Tommy, and I think
Yeah.
the general consensus is not really a prog band or album, but it's got progressive tendencies and
Totally.
a lot about the
I
greatness
agree
of the
with prog
album. and
rock, progressive rock.
Progressive.
But that's really not what, but of course, that's not what this is about anyway, this particular segment. I mean, and I would argue well, yeah, it's proggy in a lot of moments, but I have a little different take on, I've been listening here, well, an interesting conversation. But yeah, it is a little bit, it could be a little bit convoluted. And if he didn't convey, you know, what the hell it was all about, I think they did an amazing job in this album. Like, the band, I mean, I don't know, like, I can't tell that from listening to this album. I mean, I hadn't played it in years. And I mean, it is such a good album for me. So even though the band might not have understood where he was at and what this concept was all about, I think they just, I mean, I can't tell that as a listener. I'm not a musician though, so, you know, and but for me it works. So interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So how about the other one we were going to cover today? So Queen 2, band's second album, follows a really ferocious heavy rock first album. I don't think anybody would deny that that is a crushing first album.
Bloody hell, yeah.
This sounds pretty heavy too. Maybe not
Yes.
quite as much,
No.
but it's interesting, you know, they would go from here to Sheer Heart Attack, which has a lot of artsiness and lots of heaviness. And then A Night at the Opera, which sees, I think, everything that was kind of starting here really come to fruition. But most people, all these years later, look back and they say, this is Queen's true prog album. Is it? George, what do you think?
I'm going to say no again. It's what one of the themes with the Floyd thing is a message board I used to go to. They used to call it Big P and Little P, progressive. Progressive, the dictionary word, or prog rock, the genre term. The genre term, it's not. It's a varied album, but is varied progressive in the sense of the genre term? No, it's again a dictionary definition. It's more varied than the debut for sure. It's more textural, more dynamics, but in the terms of what we now today look back on and say progressive, I think Stephen will get the same, just like he got on his Twitter. People are like, is that really progressive? I think that's what you get. And that is a little bit telling that, like, nobody says that for Yes or Genesis. You play them, they know, or you show the album, they know that's what it sounds like. That's what it's supposed to be. If you have to explain it, I don't know, maybe your case is not that strong. It's a fantastic album, ridiculously good, varied, all kinds of stuff across the board. But in the end, it's a rock album, a really, really good one for me.
But it's sophisticated. They're singing about the Black Queen and the fairy teller and the seven sailing across the seven seas awry, and they're singing about ogres. Isn't that prog?
To some
John, isn't that prog?
No. That in itself isn't prog, but I think there's a lot of proggy. I mean, I wouldn't call this a progressive rock album, but I would call it an art rock album. I would call it an album with lots of progressive moments in it, like the Black Queen or the March of the Black Queen, White Queen. You know, there's some really there. I mean, these guys are so talented musically, you know, and the layers that they did some more experimentation, I think, on this album. The vocal arrangements, you know, it's more varied than one. The vocal arrangements are better, in my opinion. And they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. But is it a prog album? No, but it's one of the best rock albums that's, you know, ever been made, in my opinion.
I mean, Lewis, do you totally see the seeds that are planted here that would resurface on the next like 3 albums specifically?
Well, you know, if we go by Steven's checklist, right? I would argue that this is even more prog because some of the ideas from this album are being played back in future albums.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you, Lewis, okay, because I've obviously done the same test.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give you the questions again.
There we go. Go ahead. Lewis, you answer this time.
This is Queen 2. Okay.
Yes.
Are you a concept album?
I would say so.
Kinda. I've given it a half mark.
I would say that it's
I've
two
given it a half.
concept. It's a
It's
concept per
Queen
side.
too, nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah,
It's themed.
it
Would you say
is.
it's a
It-
concept?
I agree with
it's
that.
like a bad trip
It is
in
themed.
fairyland.
Okay. Are you a double album?
Nay.
No. Do you have multiple characters within your story?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Are you an overblown idea that's grand in execution?
Bloody hell. Yeah.
Define it.
Absolutely.
Yes, without a doubt.
So do you contain some long instrumental passages?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
Do you have
introduction.
musical motifs that reappear as the album plays out?
No.
No. Okay. Do you have at least one 10-minute plus song or one 9-10 minute plus song?
No.
No. Okay. Are your longer songs linked by some shorter joining tracks that merely there to move the story along?
Yes, I would say that. Yes, some of these the segues and all that. Yes.
Mm. Do you have lots of lyrical and musical complexity and have great interplay between the musicians?
Yes, with Queen.
Yes. And have you been made into a play or a musical or any of those sort of things?
Well, what's the Brian May
Yes or
song?
no?
with
As I
with
said to
Caroline?
Peter when he was being the Tommy album, these are yes or no answers, Lewis.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Probably no.
Probably no. So we end up with, depending on how we view it, somewhere of a score between 6 and 7 and around there.
Right.
Okay. But for me, I mean, I've already nailed my colours to the mast. Sorry to interrupt, Peter, and
Oh no, this is great.
ruin
This
the
is great.
flow of the squares, right?
Hey, that's what this is about, conversation.
If
And
we want to go back, and I've now got to be true to myself. If we want to go back to the show we did about the best progressive rock albums from 1974, hey everyone, this is number 1 for me.
Yes, that's
This is
right.
number
Right. Yep.
1 for me. That
Thank
was
you.
what I voted for. And immediately George went, well, I thought we agreed this wasn't prog rock. But if you thought it was, you would have chosen it. So to me, that I have no question that this is progressive rock. There's not a question in my mind that this is progressive rock. And,
Right.
and there's a variety of reasons for that. I think that side 2 is much more prog than side 1. And I think that's because Mercury is much more flamboyant and out there and daring, and it's much more about his vocal arrangements and various things like that too. However, I would also say that, and this is just my humble opinion here, that exactly what George is talking about, if you were to look at what we now, and obviously we're having a discussion now, describe as prog rock, are either of these albums prog? Well, no. Okay, but that to me is the problem with the term. The problem with the term, if we're only going to talk about what prog is, it's that. It's become something remarkably narrow. And you could argue, if you really wanted to go and dissect most of the shows that we do, we actually have to add in little, caveats. We're talking about fusion here now, and we're talking about avant-garde now, but we agree as a collective that this is the right kind of thing to describe prog. When we talk about prog and what we would like to recommend and stuff that we listen to at home and what we really like and the best albums of the year, whichever year, if they encompass all of these things, then they're all progressive rock. But what we are now doing is we're now enforcing prog onto that. And the older I get, the less a fan I am of prog, because it's that. And the more of a fan I am of progressive music, because it's that.
My whole
And
point.
that's where I think all of our tastes are. I'm not any different from anybody else on this show. If you want to even just give a very quick analysis of what we all as individuals bring to these shows, they're so wide, so varied, so different. We all appreciate, or don't, all of that music. But we all agree that it's progressive. So is Queen 2 progressive? Yeah, damn right it is. It was my best progressive album from 1974. But exactly the same with Tommy. And this is why I'll still say that George is right. Is it prog? No. And I'm happy about that. But it's damn progressive. I'll be quiet.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, you could argue that it's so progressive and so not prog that Queen, who I find is very much influenced by Tommy and the Who, right? They actually use themselves as a human mellotron choir instead of a tape in a machine. And that is a perfect
very
metaphor
much so.
to distinguish, right? If it has the tape playing, then it's prog. If it has guys using their voices in this live, choir, that's progressive, right? It's taking the rock format into other areas where you don't expect it necessarily to be, right? I mean, look, let's be real. If you look at an album that has a song titled The Fairy Feller's Master Stroke. You know, how it's a small distance from there to Elias of Sunhillow in terms of fucking weird. Right? I guess the good news
I'm
is
not
it's
comparing the
inspired
two.
by a painting as opposed to some acid trip, but in reality, it's you know, it's Freddie Mercury giving you a taste of darkness, but there's fairies and strange characters interweaving. The mother is already there, right?
But see, that was very trendy. Like that would
Yeah.
trend back then. Uriah Heep, dabble with the demon did wizard. That wasn't something that just that everybody was into that mythology where the bands were becoming larger than life. Led Zeppelin set that tone where they don't even go to the press and let people guess what album this is. So there's a lot of mysterious thing going down. Even Black Sabbath played into those rumor mills. Alice Cooper bites off a chicken and they let that speed up and let them become more mythical than life. And so I think they all wanted to have these crazy titles. I mean, By-Tor and the Snow Dog and Rush's second album, just like Queen would do, pretty creative. The scene was happening where bands were putting out music like that in the prog world. So they're going to influence their own pop writing. But to me, I think this is a very progressive record. Everybody said it. It's definitely a leap and bound, even from the first album, which I think is a kick-ass rock record. And this album rocked too, and it has progressive moments throughout it. But I find it more the artsy rock category because, but it is definitely a progressive album, and no question in my mind.
Yeah.
It's just that I don't think they wanted to label themselves into one thing. See, that was some of the things that's responsible from the Beatles bringing out like the White Album or Sgt. Pepper or Magical Mystery Tour, is that every song's so different and so mind expanding that any creativity that you do, you get lumped in that progressive or artsy title. And the difference with this album is that they did want to show the musicianship like Yes. I think they did want to show some of the height of their power, of their ability, like a progressive prog rock band would do, show off their talent. So there was an exercise for them to show off, like some of our prog heroes do. In the, Keith Emerson, Palmer, all of them get a chance to show their ability. And I think Queen put that into their music as well. That makes it more progressive writing. Just the fact they're gonna have a kick-ass solo or showing some vocal harmony that's just out of this world. And I think that's because the progressive albums beforehand, Sgt. Pepper, the Tommy, all those things shaped the way that 70s did. I mean, think about it. Prog was king in the 70s, so a lot of bands dabbled in it. I remember Pete and I talked about this a lot. When you think of where Led Zeppelin was, from Zeppelin 4, and then House of the Holy had some proggy moments, it's only because it's in the air. And Queen could be affected too. Argent affected. Sabbath was affected. They say, hey man, we got people that filling arena being really creative. And the next two albums, they showed some proggy moments. But did they want to be a prog rock band like our buddy Steven had pointed out? No. But they definitely want to be respected as an artist, that we are just as creative as some. We're not just a rock and roll garage band. We can expand too. And so I think that was something that Tommy and all those historic albums I just talked about before set that challenge to every artist that get out there and rock. You got to come up with some epic on your record. And people would do that because we know ELO would do it. We know that Elton John, Funeral for a Friend. I mean, he made that epic, even though he had beautiful hits like Candle in the Wind and so on that he's famous for. But he knew he had to show that side of him somehow, because that was somewhat showing you how the 70s was. David Bowie would say, okay, I'm going to be a character, Ziggy Stardust from Mars, and bring this concept. I mean, everybody was really taking chances, and I think that's progressive, and I think it will fill in the pop culture, and that's why we're gonna have some arguments in the 70s. Is that progressive or that prog? Because the 70s, that was in the air, and it affected every genre of music to some degree. Even no one was immune to it. Even the Eagles would have to put something out, like in Hotel California, a span a little bit from something that they never would have done it before. Everybody was challenged to come up with some kind of epic or show that you have a masterpiece like Sgt. Pepper. Or
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I want to make one quick point before we go over to Armando. It's easy for all of us to talk about this now, all these years later, but I think if we put ourselves back in 1974, nobody really cared about what genres it called, because we really, back then, they weren't really using heavy metal or progressive rock or all these tags and classifications that are so important to us now, looking back on all this historically. So back then, a fusion band didn't care if they did a rock album, and a prog band didn't care if they did a pop album, and a pop band didn't care if they did a hard rock album, and Black Sabbath didn't care if they did a psychedelic album, and Led Zeppelin didn't care if they did a folk album. They really didn't care because there was not all of these classifications, and bands just played music, right? However it came out. So that being said, Armando, your take on Queen too. I know you're a huge fan of the band.
Well, the fact that I have the Queen 2 logo as a tattoo on my arm means nothing, right? Like it means nothing at all. The thing with Queen, they suffered in the beginning of the album releases due to timing. The Queen first album was recorded in 72. It wasn't released until 73, right? Queen 2 was recorded in August of 73. It wasn't released until April of 74. So that album, Queen 2, was a product of its time. You had groups like Yes and Genesis and Gentle Giant and all these bands, King Crimson, that were doing, this progressive or prog music. The album itself, it's very layered, it's very textured, it's very bombastic. The original title for it was going to be Over the Top, because they had what they called this wall of sound that they created, the layers of guitars, the layers of harmonies, the layers of drums, different arrangements, different time signatures. Side 2, and they all, the songs all segue into one another. 99% of them, with the exception of Seven Seas of Rye at the very end. Starting off with the backwards gong on Ogre Battle at the front, and then at the end of it, Fairy Fellow's Masterstroke, which was inspired by a painting by Richard Dadd that hangs in the Tate Gallery in England. The March of the Black Queen, which I think is your favorite song, Pete. 6 minutes and 30 seconds. The research I did, and yes, I did do research on Wikipedia. Thank you very much. The research I did, there's 2 different type signatures on there. There's polyrhythm and polymeter, which are 8/8 and 12/8 time signatures. Now, those time signatures are very rare to be used in music, like in popular music, and they were being used at the same time on the same track. So, is it prog? For me, damn near. If it isn't progressive music, to me it is progressive. They threw everything in there but the kitchen sink. And I think they actually did that at one point. They put so much time and effort into that. So to me, that is their definite statement. That was where they came into their sound. That's where they presented themselves as a hard rock band with multi-layered arrangements, multi-layered harmonies. And they had a statement. Even the packaging of the album, like the cover, it was inspired by a movie with Marlene Dietrich called Shanghai Express, right? Mick Rock did the album cover. He brought the photo of Marlene Dietrich to Freddie Mercury. He says, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I shall be Marlena. Freddie said, when we do the shot. And when he heard the album, they played an acetate of the album. He says, Mick Rock said, oh, okay, Ziggy Stardust meets Led Zeppelin. And they said, that's it. That's what we're going for. So again, back to the question, is it prog? Damn near. To me, it's just a fantastic rock album. And it's the one album I go back to more often than an at the opera to listen to.
Yeah, I think it's the one album in their catalog that I think is very overlooked and underrated by the casual fan, who will only listen to the greatest hits, or will only listen to the game, or only listen to Night at the Opera.
Maybe News of the World.
And maybe News of the World.
Maybe.
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of everything on this album. And I definitely don't think you get a lot of the grandioseness of a Night at the Opera without this album happening first. I mean, you've got pretty much heavy metal with Ogre Battle. You've got the March of the Black Queen, that's a prog song in my book, as is White Queen. Father to Son is good, majestic hard rock. Fairy Teller's Master Stroke has that kind of quirky, very English nature of their music. It's just so
All Freddie.
Yeah, I mean, so majestic and grandiose. Seven Seas Arise is just great. You got blues rock of See What a Fool I've Been. It's like there's a little bit of everything on this album.
That's right.
And I think most important, it's a very classy album. I mean, a lot of the early Queen stuff is, or most of the Queen catalog.
It's important to note, it's important to note that Freddie Mercury had in his record collection a copy of Tommy.
I'm sure he did.
That and Cabaret. So take from that what you will.
Yeah.
I take from that the fairy song, which is basically a blend of those two things.
Well, the Fairy Fellas Masterstroke, again, it's based on that painting from Richard Dadd.
Yeah, but the music, I mean, the ideas.
Yeah, the idea of it, yeah.
The blending. I don't know. I find that sometimes with prog, people like to, when we say prog, it has to have the twiddly bits. And neither Queen nor the Who are great at twiddly bits.
Right, dude, you're absolutely correct.
Right.
That's the thing.
I mean, Lewis brings up a good point. The really strict progressive rock fans, right?
Right.
They have you right, absolutely right. So
Steven nailed it.
That list that Stephen had earlier, the checklist, there are additional questions on that.
Yeah. I am aware of that. Yeah. What I was going to say though is, I think the reason that we're having a problem here is that you could lift the March of the Black Queen and say maybe only Undertour, and you could place those songs on the best prog rock album ever, right? You could do that, and everyone would go, yeah, they belong there. That's prog rock. They must be prog rock bands. But look at both albums, and if you were just to say to a casual music fan that's aware of these bands, okay, look at the back, look at the track list, and what's the song you know? Well, they're going to look at Tommy and they're going to go, it's Pinball Wizard. Well, that's a rock song, okay? And then they're going to pick up Queen 2 and they're going to go all the way at the bottom and go, Seven Seas Arise. And that's a rock song. And that's why we're having such a problem here, is because they didn't care. And that's what changed as we moved into the 70s, is that the band began to care. Now, even when I started buying things like Kerrang in the early 80s, they covered everything from Metallica, and in their charts at the back, because that was their back page, was the charts, they would have Current Genesis in there, right? And by that time, they weren't even progressive, never mind prog. Okay. But it all came under this broad umbrella. And from there onwards, I mean, now, if you buy a copy of classic rock, if you want to get a broader view of what's going on, well, they don't all exist now because magazine sales don't do what they did. But you need to buy classic rock, you need to buy prog. They did an AOR issue for a while. There's blues. The media have gone like this with it. It needs to be split. It needs to be, you can do that. Mm-hmm. And if you dare step outside of that, everyone goes, whoa, boo. Why did you do that? We didn't want that.
Yeah.
Because back when we were talking here between 69 and mid 70s, who gave a damn? Nobody gave a damn. We didn't care. Is it good? It's bloody good.
And a lot had to do with the billing, right? Back in the day, in the 70s, you would have a concert with Joni Mitchell's on there, then some big band that's so loud and how, and then you have a progressive band, and then you have a big, so it's very common in the prog or in the 70s world to have multiple acts that are so different and so unique of their own that it was okay. You didn't get pigeonholed so quickly as we did when we get into the 80s or the 90s. You either a rocker or you're...
I just think, sorry, Louis, I just think, I've said this before in the chat, I think in the late 60s, early 70s, even through to the 1980, bands were given 4 or 5 record album contracts. They were allowed to have 1 or 2 albums before they had the big hit, right? So they were allowed to mature, get their musical leg going.
A little more leeway.
Yeah, they had more leeway. Sorry, perfect. Sorry about that. They had the leeway to be able to do what they wanted to do until they found a sound for them, or they maybe honed in on a sound that worked for them. These days, an album like Queen 2 they'd release it. If it didn't work, you'd be off the label. But back then, Elektra and EMI, with regards to Queen, they allowed them to progress.
And that's started in the 80s. The 80s, that whole leeway thing was out the window already.
That's right.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
2 points. Number 1, I think we cannot underestimate the importance of the change in the recreational drugs in the two generations.
Sure.
You go from weed and shrooms and acid to cocaine.
Oh shit.
Number 2, as Frank Zappa himself said it, don't take it from me. In the old days, you had these cigar stomping guys who thought it was all crap, but they were willing to take a risk on it and put it out because people were apparently willing to buy it. Then some guy had the great idea to bring in somebody hip and knowledgeable to make these decisions. And then that's when the narrow tunnel vision and the Joe movements of the cokeheads take over, and things become very, very, very much, if it has to be this. What do we start to see? That every band sounds like every other.
By the
band.
numbers.
Everything becomes. This is the formula. I mean, Kevin Gilbert wrote one of the best albums I ever heard, is The Shaming of the True, and it deals with this issue, of the test tube mentality, of the factory mentality of the music industry as it evolved. And I think, and how it chews up people and spits them out. Your start today, your garbage tomorrow.
Yep.
And that is the thing. I think
That's right.
Pink Floyd would not exist today. How many records before Dark Side of the Moon?
7. 6.
Forget it. They're out. They're done. They're history. They would have to self-finance. And who knows if we'd find them, because they're a drop of water in an ocean, right?
Yeah.
So it was a different time. It was a different place. I think the fact that people were taking much more mellow drugs allowed them to enjoy more expansive sounds.
I agree.
And then it became very compact, very paranoid, very, very intense, right?
There's been a cultural shift as well, though, outside of who's deciding what's worth listening to. One of the things that fascinates me about more casual music listeners is how easy they find it to answer the question, so what music do you like? Because I find that virtually impossible. I mean, like everybody here, I've got a ridiculous amount of music in this house.
Yeah.
So when somebody says to me, so what kind of music do you like? It all just drips out of my ears and I forget all of the stuff that I've got because I can't describe it. Because it covers such a broad spectrum of things that I like. But there are lots of people that you can ask that question of and they'll go, it's that, I like that. And that blows my mind. Can you like that?
Last week,
I think that's a very current thing.
Yes.
I would say the last 10, 15 years, that's become a thing where that's an easy question to answer. It wasn't before, I don't
Me, like, I like hip hop. I like what's on the radio. I like pop music. What is that?
But it's infected even, I think, the genres that we talk about. That's
Yeah.
why you've now got a magazine for this and a magazine for that and a magazine for this and a magazine for that. I must admit, I'm not trying to paint out myself or anybody else as, we've got much broader taste than everybody else. It's a generational thing to some extent, I would suggest. The current generation are used to having everything at their fingertips.
Mm-hmm.
But how much
Very
is listened to?
manufactured.
Yeah.
Can I
That's
just
what I
put
find.
something in quickly? Last week when I was doing my workout at the gym, the girl that was helping me, Oasis came on the speaker, right? And the woman that was running the workout session comes over. She said, "Oh, I love Oasis, don't you?" I'm like, "No, can't stand them.
Come on, Armando. You don't love Oasis?
Can't stand them." And then the girl that was helping me out, like, asked me, "Okay, what's your go-to music?" I said, "Well, I like Queen." And the woman that was running the workout says, "My parents love Queen." And I'm like, "How old are you?" She's like, "I'm 22. I'm like, "I'll be 52. She's, "Oh my God, but Queen are amazing." I was like I felt old. Like I felt really freaking old. It's like, you don't look your age. I'm like, what? It's a generational thing. It is.
I teach at a
Ridiculous.
university. When I tell students my age, their face is basically, they don't say it, but they're thinking, you're 50 what? Don't you die of 50 what? It's a little bit like
You're
that.
alive?
Yeah.
She actually just said to me, "You don't look your age. You look 31." I'm like, "Give me a break. I've already paid for the sessions. You don't have to butter me up or whatever." Like, come on. She said, no, you don't look 52. I'm like, "You look 31." I'm like, oh, God. But like,
Oh man,
it
these
is a
are scars of
generational thing.
survival. We
Mm.
earned this shit.
Yeah. No, I know. No, it's true. But it's a generational thing. It's like music today is so accessible. Like you can get it anywhere. Back in the day when we were buying albums and stuff, like, back in 74, Queen were still referred to as an import, right? When they would talk about them. So it wasn't that easy to get to get the music. But
There just doesn't seem to be, as Stephen said, it's everything, the younger generation or the current younger generation, I guess, they want everything, everything has to be immediate and accessible. There just doesn't seem to be the care and attention put on music. I mean, when I was a kid, we'd play albums and we'd, smoke a little dope. We'd, and we pick specific songs, right? I mean, we put on several small species of furry animals and just like, it's such a mind trip. And we'd listen to a lot of different stuff. And, we'd listen to, there was a prog show on the radio. We'd really search for stuff, even though we didn't have the internet. And it's kind of amazing to me, actually, when you think about it now with the internet, who actually searches for music, like for new music. It's so easily accessible, but it's just, I'm not sure what it is. Like
whatever comes up on Spotify next, right? I mean, it's just like,
well, I think we got busted of both worlds. Cause for us, we can appreciate it going to the record shop back in the day, or how to do your homework, or we had the Columbia
it's
House
a lost
order.
art, right?
We love Amazon today because let's face it, if it wasn't for this show, I wouldn't able to get access to some of these albums that you talked about. Let's be honest. If it wasn't for today's technology, some of these bands, we wouldn't even have the half of the content of this SOT channel if it wasn't for the fact that we can get it now. Or hey, if you don't, how many times did Pete used to tell us way back? I mean, remember, I've been following this channel since 2017. He used to say, pause it and go check it out and come back. Pause this thing and then tell me what you think. And how do you think we do it? We go on YouTube and find that song. That wasn't available back in the day. once in a while you might get some record shop that allow you to take a record and sample it and listen to it. If it's a used record, they might let you do that, but you can never get anything brand new. Try it out. You open it, you bought it, so you were always guessing. With at least kids do have an advantage to say, hey, I want to get that Zeppelin song. Well, I don't have to buy every one to find that, oh, Dazed and Confused was on the first record. I didn't know the title of it. So at least today they can find it, and there's no excuse to discover the blast of the past. And I think
agree.
that's why this SOT channel is so important, because we are preserving what is a lost relic of finding music the way we did it back in the day. And because we share these stories with the cassette or even the physical channel that Jamie's given us, it's showing us that we treasure these things because they were a piece of time, and we've gotten so corporate and we got so commercialized that we're forgetting some of these great gems, and that's why we keep resurfing these subjects. So, but to be honest, I wouldn't even have access to finding that lost concert if it wasn't for today's technology and the accessibility. So I'd say we got the pros and the cons. I'm just glad you and I, all of us, lived this long to see all of it, to appreciate how powerful it was. Because like you said it best, John and Lewis and everybody else have said this one time or another, it was an experience to grab a record and then you're listening to it like you are going to a movie theater or going to a play, and you got the program and you're following the content as you're about to see the stuff. This was an experience. Today it's just a background thing in the background music all the time. And what Spotify does and all those other places, it cheapens our music not to appreciate the search for it. At least if you bought your hard-earned, with your allowance as a kid, you're gonna listen to the whole record. You're gonna listen to it. I know I bought it for this song, but I want to know more about who is on it. Today in the digital world, you don't even know who's on the record. You don't even know what special guest there, unless it was put on on the internet as a Wikipedia or whatever. But you know what I'm saying. So there's pros and cons to this. But if the one thing for sure is that this channel does that to help us appreciate these stories that we're talking about.
Yeah.
To pass that torch to that generation that wouldn't know what we know, and they can value a little bit more than not. Because back in the day, you could pay even just to go to a jukebox, you had to pay a quarter, 50 cents to hear a song. Everybody's hearing everything for free, and it shouldn't be that.
No, it shouldn't be that. And
A
I think
a little footnote, my copy of Banco di Tata just came in the mail today on vinyl.
oh, you got Bonko. Very cool.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
I found it and on Discogs, and guy sent it to me, and it's like, you know what? I like it. That I wanted the physical copy.
There you go. I mean, there's something to be said for that, Yeah.
And like just to piggyback on what Rick was saying, since I've been watching this channel and be a part of it, my music collection has bloody exploded. Much to the dismay of Bob, much to the dismay of my space availability and my bank account. I can't afford it anymore. Stop it, Pete. I cannot afford it. But I mean, that's the beauty of it. Like, you discover new things, and
If you love it, you find a way.
exactly. And that's what music should be about. That's what it's too accessible today. It's too easy, I think.
I have only one point that I want to add to what Rick said. I do agree that the technology is great, right? But as with everything in life, I don't give a shit if it's music, cooking, whatever. Context is everything, right? So the context with which we interact with this technology and how we think of it is not the same as the context that other younger generations for whom music is sonic wallpaper interact with it. And that is the issue. If you guys have ever had the opportunity to go to, I'm not a religious guy, but if you go to Italy, you gotta go to Rome. I think that's a must. And if you're in Rome, I think you have to go to the Vatican, simply because the Vatican Museum is a crazy, awesome, and horrible place at once. And to me, the Vatican Museum is a perfect metaphor for what's happened to music. The Vatican Museum has got an insane collection of priceless objects, and also not that great things, but it's so many. And the thing is that they have so many that they just put them together. It's not like when you go to the Louvre or other places where they have less things and they have a better way to present them. They're all there. So when you walk down those halls of the Vatican Museum, it's sensory overload. All of a sudden, you look left, you look right, you look up, you look down. Oh, it's priceless shit everywhere. Get me the fuck out of here. That's all you get from it. You
It
can't
almost devalues
You
it.
can't appreciate it because
That's
you
can't
exactly what
appreciate
it is, John.
can't
It-
appreciate it. Yeah,
It,
it's too
it
much.
devalues it to the point that it's not worth anything, and that is the problem, right?
I see.
I think that the sonic wallpaper issue is the problem, and that's not has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with how you view the value of something.
Yep.
If it has no value, if it's supposed to be for free, done. Right?
I think, Peter, that what we're trying to say is that we don't know if Tommy or Queen 2 are prog rock or not.
I
wonder how we're gonna wrap this up.
Yeah, we
As
kinda
Chris
went off
Allen
the
would
rails
say,
here.
100%.
Yeah.
We kind of went off the rails here with
It's
the.
all right. Well, yeah, I mean, in the end, does it really matter if either of these albums are prog? No. I mean, but these are just two examples of albums by bands that we don't normally consider prog rock, but these are kind of falls into that
Definitely
category
progressive.
somewhat. But I think what as kind of like a takeaway and a summary here, especially no, for both of these, because what we've been talking about for the last like 10, 15 minutes is really plays special to me and pretty close to me, because I feel that a lot of people today take music for granted. They don't value it much, and it's like a commodity. It's free, it's out there, I can go listen to anything. I don't care what it is. Oh, I like that song. I don't like that song. I don't need to buy an album. I'll just pick the songs I like. Well, blah, 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 blah. To me, that's not why these artists create this stuff. And I think if anybody gets anything about this episode is that, yeah, Pinball Wizard's a great song. It was a huge hit. There's a lot of really cool songs on here, and it's kind of proggy. And you know what? Maybe we don't have Bohemian Rhapsody on here. Maybe we don't have another one, Bites the Dust, or Crazy Little Thing Called Love, or We Are the Champions, We Will Rock You, all that kind of stuff. But here's some pretty complex, different, experimental, outstanding, and hard rocking Queen music on this little known album. And in the end, does any of this even matter? No. Go out and listen to both these albums, folks. They're really, really good, and maybe you'll scratch that prog itch just a little bit. So I don't know what else we can add to this conversation. So
I would just like to.
What's that?
I would just like to congratulate everybody. Big pat on the back, because we avoided entering into a lengthy discussion of what is prog.
Yes, sort of.
And that was very important for me.
Thank you.
I think that the one takeaway from this episode is prog is whatever you make of it. Whatever you think is progressive to you or prog to you, then that's what it is. It's all
Well said,
relative.
Armando. Yes.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
It's almost like the concept of Tommy, because I think it is a little bit convoluted, but I think a lot of it is open to interpretation. I mean, some of the obvious stuff, the themes, abuse, and there's so much,
Social commentary,
self-isolation,
right?
drug addiction, but there's a lot of deeper themes in there that I think Townshend left, open to interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it a pretty brilliant album and rock opera. And it's so I love both albums. Like, they're both so good, and
I would agree with that.
Grateful that we have them at our fingertips. And it'd be great if people would crank it up, check them out, because they're classics.
Yep, I would agree 100%. And whatever they are,
Yeah,
these are both outstanding for everybody watching. Let us know what you think of Queen 2 and Tommy in the comments below. And now we'll do it. Business on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube.
All the
All the
damn
damn time.
There you go. And all together while we're all the damn time, right? So thanks for watching, everybody. What do we got coming up? Tomorrow, new product review day. Man, we got a lot of stuff for you tomorrow. We got some book reviews. We got some album reviews, new Ghost, new Michael Harris, new, what else we got here? New Jonas Lindberg, all sorts of stuff. Maybe new Ty Tabor. I haven't gotten to that yet. So that's coming up tomorrow, Thursday, Monsters Den, Friday morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff. Saturday, the UK connection with Mr. Scotland over there and Mr. Lancashire. And on Sunday, we've got album homework assignment with the lovely Sydney Taylor and the equally lovely Nicholas Franco, both from the Hudson Valley Squares. And that is coming up on Sunday. So for Jon Neudorf, Stephen Reid, Louis Nasser, Armando Venditti, Rick Labonte, and George Lamie, I am Pete Pardo. Good night, everybody. See you next Tuesday on In the Prog Seat. Bye-bye.
Good
Good night,
night.
everyone.